Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders to inspire us to think differently and lead better. For this episode, I'm once again joined by Dr. Wendy Wood, who is a leading authority on the psychology of habits and the author of the best-selling book, Good Habits, Bad Habits. Her groundbreaking research has revolutionized how we think about behavior change, revealing the hidden forces that shape our daily lives. In this episode, we'll uncover why unexpected rewards keep us coming back for more, how habit stacking and habit swapping can make behavior change effortless, and how life's big transitions are golden opportunities for growth. Dr. Wood also reveals why habits persist under stress, how rituals can bring us comfort during uncertain times, and the key for designing habits that ripple positively in all areas of our life. So if you're ready to unlock the secrets of lasting change and learn how to reshape your routines for success, you're in for a treat. So let's get started. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. You also mentioned that unexpected or uncertain rewards are very good at strengthening habits, more so than those that are fixed. How can we apply this idea to build better behaviors?
We see this applied already a lot. We've done some research with social media, finding that people are more likely to keep reading, to keep scrolling on social media if they're getting really cool stuff sometimes, and then more boring stuff other times. So it's as if it keeps them entertained, interested in what they're looking at, and they develop a scrolling habit compared with when everything is just kind of moderately interesting. And we also see this with slot machines, right? That's the standard example, that people don't get a whole lot of consistent rewards from slot machines, but they keep using them. And so it is natural in daily life that rewards are often inconsistent. I mean, even hanging around with your friends, sometimes you have a great time with them. Sometimes it's just kind of okay. Sometimes you even have a bad time with them. So social interactions by their nature are inconsistently rewarding. And there are a lot of other aspects of our behavior that are naturally inconsistent in how rewarding they are. I used to be a runner and I loved to run outside. It was very rewarding for me. But, some runs were great and others didn't go so well. So, yeah, a lot of behaviors are inconsistently rewarding.
And unexpected rewards, like a surprise compliment after a workout, releases dopamine, like you mentioned, reinforcing that behavior. If it's too consistent a behavior, we just tend not to pay attention to it. So try integrating small, varied rewards into your habits, such as treating yourself after completing a goal or celebrating a milestone. It wires the habits in much faster, and it's a much stronger cue for those new habits to form. Another foundational principle of habits is repetition. It's often called the cornerstone of habit formation. Why is it so essential, and how can people keep going even when they hit setbacks along the way?
Well, repetition is important because that's what the habit memory system is sensitive to. If you've ever tried to train your dog, dogs have habits too. All mammals have a habit memory system. Whales have habits. So if you ever tried to train your dog, you know that the first few times they do something, they're just kind of getting the idea of what it is that they're supposed to be practicing. And then over time, as they do it more and more often, you can see it become automatic. They're in that context. You give them the cue, sit, whatever it is you're trying to teach them, and they have learned to respond. And that happens through repetition. So it's the neural mechanisms that pick up repetition that makes it so important for habit formation. And how to keep repeating behavior? Well, that's the context and the reward, right? You make it easy, you make it hard to do something different, and you make it rewarding while you're doing it. So if you want to start a running habit and you're not sure you're going to enjoy it much, find a podcast that you really like to listen to, that you don't listen to otherwise. And that might be rewarding enough for you to start repeating the behavior over and over. And if it's not, find something else. You need a reward that's going to keep you repeating the action.
And you mentioned too with habits, especially when they're beginning, setbacks are normal, but what matters is persistence, not perfection. Missing a day or two won't cause you to lose any progress. The key is to return to the routine as quickly as possible.
Yeah, habit memory is very forgiving in that way. It forms slowly, but it decays only slowly too. So if you're part way to forming a habit and you get distracted and you don't do it for a while, when you get back to it, you're still part way to forming a habit. So habit memories are forgiving, and you shouldn't be too discouraged if you try and then don't do it this time. Next time, you may have figured out the right reward or the right way to make contacts, facilitate the behavior, drive the behavior.
And something you mentioned just a few minutes ago that I really wanted to unpack is habit stacking, because that's an effective way to stack new habits with existing ones. So if you really don't want to work out or run, and maybe you love binge watching a certain Netflix show, well, only allow yourself to watch that show when you're trying to do this new habit.
Yeah, so we have found that it's actually a good way to introduce a new product into the marketplace as well. So when people have a pattern of using a certain product, if you can piggyback a new product onto that existing habit, then you're taking advantage of the automaticity that already exists. And so you're going to make it more likely that people are going to be able to adopt the new product. Because so many of us buy new stuff and then end up not using it. And one of the reasons we found is, in fact, a very prominent reason, is because it's inconsistent with their existing habits. So you want to make sure that whatever the new item is, it's consistent with what people are already doing, easily integrated, piggybacked, or stacked onto what they're already doing.
You also mentioned swapping. You can swap habits. So you can swap an old habit with a similar one, such as drinking herbal tea instead of soda. Both strategies build on established routines, hopefully minimizing the disruption, correct?
Yes, but just make sure that you like herbal tea as much as you like soda, or else that's not going to work very well for you.
I
Yeah.
love it. So, major life changes like moving or starting a new job often disrupt our routines. And these changes are really the enemy of habits, because habits thrive in stable, consistent environments. But how can individuals, talked to Katie Milkman, and she has a great book, How to Change. And she said, the fresh start effects allows us to look at change differently and say, how can we use these moments of habit discontinuity to establish new beneficial habits and rewire those that really aren't working?
People often use dates as fresh starts, and that there's no evidence that that's effective. But tying a fresh start to a change in context, that actually does work. There's great research by Bosfor Plonkin on what he calls habit discontinuity. So when you move to a new place, start a new job, start a new relationship, then the cues to your old habits are no longer there. And that's one of the reasons why it's so exhausting, right? To move to a new place, you have to not only set up all your stuff, you have to figure out where's the grocery store, what about the neighbor next door? Will they do things for me that my old neighbor would do? Making lots of decisions. And it's an opportunity as well, because you have to make these decisions. It's an opportunity to change your behavior and form new habits.
So take advantage of these changes of habit discontinuity by deliberately introducing new routines that align with your goals, like joining a gym when you move to a new city, or re-examining possibly some of the habits that are no longer serving you. And habits often, help you in certain areas as well. So with stress often makes decision making harder, but habits seem to thrive in these moments you state. Why do habits persist under stress, and how can we design habits to support us in challenging times?
Yeah, so most people think that when they get stressed, they fall back into bad habits. But in actuality, they fall back into good habits too. They do it about equally, because what stress does is it makes it more difficult for us to think and make decisions. It takes up that executive control. So we're less likely to change habits, either bad or good ones. And we're more likely to just fall back on what we've done all along. So having good habits is really useful when you're going through a period of stress, because you'll fall back on them. And having bad habits when you're stressed is going to be even more problematic, because you're not going to have the energy or the decision-making ability to control those bad habits. It's going to put you back into repeating things you'd rather not.
And I love how you mentioned that stress weakens our conscious decision making, but activates these automatic behaviors, which is where habits lie. And designing supportive habits like prepping healthy meals in advance ensures that those good behaviors, those good habits persist, even when our conscious focus wanes at times of high stress or a great deal of uncertainty. And there's this fascinating idea that you also mentioned, that we don't just like doing things repeatedly. We actually grow to like things we do repeatedly. And I know that's kind of confusing, but how can we intentionally harness this feedback loop to build behaviors that promote long-term happiness?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I teach classes, students come in and they often sit just wherever is available, right? Particularly students who come in late. They don't have a choice. They just have to take a seat. And then on day 2, they keep taking that seat. And the whole semester, they stick with it. And I've asked students why they do that. And they say they're just more comfortable. They kind of got used to it. It's familiar. And that's an example of how we learn to like what we do habitually. It feels comfortable. It's easy. It doesn't require thought. And so it just feels normal. It feels right. So to the extent that we can form good habits, those habits are going to become things that we embrace, even when we're making decisions to change, because they're going to feel like the right thing to do. So even if we move, we're going to fall back on our good habits and recreate them, because they feel right, because they feel comforting, familiar.
And that's such an important concept to emphasize, that repetition creates familiarity and ease, which fosters liking. So start small with habits you want to develop. As they become routine, your enjoyment and motivation will naturally increase. I was talking to Dan Ariely last year on the program, and he said, we line up behind our choices, our previous choices. So if you go to Starbucks for the first time, you say, well, that was pretty good. the 10th time, the 11th time, you're just lining up behind those previous choices that you made, increasing that familiarity, that ease with it, and probably misattributing why you're going there to begin with. Because at first it was a random decision, but now you feel like, well, it's just, they have better coffee, they have better pastries, but really that wasn't the case. And you're misattributing, kind of why you're doing it to begin with. But that repetition, like you said, builds familiarity and ease, which fosters liking, and you continue to do what you've always done because it's
Yeah,
more familiar.
that's like that introspection illusion that you were talking about earlier. Because we don't really know why we're repeating the behavior, we assume we must have chosen it. And that's all part of this process. Yes.
Love also what you say about rituals. If you could just explain the difference between rituals versus habits. So many of us have rituals, they're common in the sports field, but business is rife with them as well. So, why do rituals seem to bring such comfort for us during stressful or uncertain times?
Well, rituals are different from habits because people are conscious of their rituals, and it's the meaning that we impose on a ritual. Sports is a great example. I love watching batters coming up to bat and seeing what they do in baseball. It's the meaning that we impose on them that give them power, that make them important in our lives. Habits are things that we don't have to think about, that we just do. And it's actually a bit of a challenge with rituals to keep us consciously thinking about what we're doing. You see this with, say, the Japanese tea ceremony or religious rituals, that people sometimes start feeling like they're just going through the motions and they're not experiencing the real reason, the spiritual reason why they are doing the behavior. So you have to keep conscious and keep focused to really experience a ritual. A habit, we're doing it. You and I are doing it all the time while we're talking.
You're right. And rituals differ from habits. I love what you said, about they often lack that immediate practical reward, but they are more symbolic or meaningful and versus automatic, which habits are driven by environmental cues. And I find that rituals bring comfort during stressful times for a lot of people because they create order out of chaos and maybe satisfy our psychological need for predictability, which can kind of hopefully distract us away from anxiety and maybe perhaps even help us to perform better in those circumstances. What habits do you tend to see have the greatest ripple effects on other areas of our life? Are there certain habits that you've, from all your research and experience, that have seen that really are those keystone habits that you would recommend people trying to build first that would have the greatest positive impact?
I don't know that there's any evidence for keystone habits. I think that's something someone made up. So I think that goes along with the 21-day rule. Um, habits are contained within a specific context, right? So a habit that you have in one context doesn't necessarily have much to do with what you're doing in a different context. And that's why habits, you can think of habits as either really stable because they're so tied to a context, or you can think about them as being somewhat fragile because if context shift, then habits shift. Whether you want to do the behavior or not, you now have to work at it. So habits are contained within a context is the way to understand it.
Are there any other common mistakes that you've seen that really deter people from trying to break those pesky bad habits that just seem to resurface throughout time?
Yeah, it's not understanding the role of the environment. So we focus, as you said, on willpower, on why we should do something. We talk ourselves into it. We feel good because we've made a decision we're going to change without realizing that unless we change the context to make the desired behavior easier and the one that you're trying to get rid of harder, you're not likely to be able to maintain change over time. So it's understanding the role of the environment. And let me give you an example that from some recent research that we did on vaccinations. COVID vaccinations, there's lots of data on what led people to get a COVID vaccination to begin with. And much of the research is about people's political beliefs, their health beliefs, their motivation, their concern for their family. All of those things are certainly important. But one of the important features that was often overlooked is how easy is it to get a vaccine. So we looked in California and Chicago at how far people were, the distance that they were from a vaccine clinic of any kind. And we found that people who were closer to a vaccine clinic, no matter what their health beliefs, no matter what their political beliefs, were more likely to get a vaccine. People who were further away, again, regardless of their beliefs, were less likely to do so. It's a very simple explanation that if you're ambivalent about doing something, or if you've gotten tired of the struggle of trying to make yourself do something, then if it's easier, you're just going to be more likely to do it. That cost-benefit analysis shifts in the direction of the behavior. But if it's difficult, if the vaccine sites are far away, if your gym is far away, if you have lots of cookies and other things on your kitchen counter, then it's going to be hard for you to be able to follow through. So the role of context is really critical, and it's something that we overlook.
Well, it's also important when you look at addiction versus habit, and perhaps you can identify that distinction for us and kind of what specific strategies can individuals use to replace addictive behaviors with healthier habits.
Yeah, addiction is actually much more complicated than habit. Habit is part of addiction. When you have an addiction, you have typically habitual behaviors that you engage in, but there's all kinds of other physiological changes. There's craving, experience of withdrawal when you don't take whatever the substance or do whatever the addiction is. So addiction is a multi-component kind of a process, and habit is one small part of it. But changing the habit piece involves just the same as changing any other habit, which is controlling your environment, controlling the cues. And that's why one of the things that obvious recommendations made by AA to people who are trying to control alcohol use is don't hang out in bars, right? And don't hang out with friends who drink a whole lot, because those are the cues that are going to start you again. So controlling the environment is also part of alcohol treatment, successful alcohol treatment.
I once heard the statement, don't go into the bar to eat pretzels, right? If you're an alcoholic, right? Just avoid those environments that are going to trigger that bad behavior. Are there any strategies that people can use to recognize or to help them be more self-aware when their habits are no longer serving them and they need to be readjusted?
Well, it's just if your behavior isn't meeting your goals and it's consistently not meeting your goals, then that's the cue that you need to start doing something different. Yeah.
And technology really plays a big role now more and more in our habits and right trying to design the right kind of digital environment to encourage positive behaviors because the default is the opposite and there's plenty of money and intellect with those companies trying to get you to just stay on social media for longer and develop those habits that will help make them more money.
Yeah, it's amazing how much social media is just like the old Skinner boxes with pigeons, where we do certain things, we get immediate rewards. We can do them again, we get immediate rewards. We can stay on social media far longer than is good for us. And it's because they build on habit learning principles. They're very powerful for social media.
They are. Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for joining me today. I always like to give a call to action to our listeners as they're ending each episode with us. What is one thing that leaders or individuals can do to get better at developing habits that will serve them based on what we talked about today?
I keep emphasizing the role of context, and I think that's what people need to focus on is healthy habits are easy in healthy contexts. Productive habits are easy in productive contexts. You have to figure out for any context what is it's supporting, what it's driving, and what it's making more difficult. And that's going to make it easier for us to then understand how to create the habits that we want to.
I love that. And less on willpower and your own strength or efforts. Focus more on the context and the environment. Great advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Wendy Wood, for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also, you can just contact me at USC. My email is wendy.wood@usc.edu, or just Google Wendy Wood and you'll probably get me.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.